Welcome back to the great conversation. We finished last time where the Spartans were called on to help Croesus, but they were too busy with their own conflict.
Yes.
So Croesus had been taken captive. There was a siege around Sardis. Cyrus was going to take that kingdom. And so what happens now is one of Cyrus's great soldiers finds a wall that he can scale, essentially, that no man had ever been able to take before. And he says, I'm going to do it. So they scale the wall. There's no security there. And then they take Sardis.
Yeah.
And so then Croesus, being a prisoner, he is laid atop of this big pile. And there,
Pile of what?
Well, I'm thinking bodies,
Okay.
but
They don't actually
they
say.
don't, explain. And other royal men, sons of the Lydians, and the pile is set aflame.
Yep.
And during this time, Cyrus is wondering, is Croesus going to call upon one of his gods? Is there some reason that he should not burn this man, this ruler, alive? And so Croesus calls upon Apollo and asks that he would not be burned alive.
Yeah.
And at that time, a huge storm comes, all this rain, the fire is put out, and Cyrus then takes Croesus as a slave, but frees him in a sense. He does not kill him. And Croesus says, I am your slave. My life is yours. I will tell you all the things that you need to know so that you can keep taking on the world and your men will be loyal to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really cool, just the way that kingdoms worked at that time, that Croesus said, okay, I was not able to overcome Cyrus, and so that means that he's the better man, and I have to be loyal to him.
Yeah.
And then this conversation takes place about why Cyrus asks Croesus, why did you need to start this conflict with me? We were at peace. And Croesus says, it's true. A man is foolish if he would prefer war over peace.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool. But Croesus really blames the gods for the oracle that came to him saying that he would take over an empire, but he misheard the oracle. Or
a great empire would fall at his hands.
He didn't stop to question what empire is that, and that was his own foolish mistake. And he really took credit for that. He was like, yeah, I didn't stop to be a wise man and ask what this oracle actually meant. I just assumed that it meant I would take this great empire.
I assumed he meant I was a fabulous person.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's crazy to even contemplate what empire he might have been saying. Because a lot of times when we hear a word, right, when somebody comes to us and says, hey, this is going to happen, we if it's good, we automatically assume that it's the good of us that's going to be the benefactor. If it's bad, usually we're more questioning, right? So if maybe he said, you will see the destruction of an empire, rather than saying like a great empire will fall by your hands, like that to me sounds positive. Like, I'm going to lay waste a great empire. I'm going to conquer a great empire. And it's so interesting how just verbiage in general can deceive us into not digging deeper. And I think we've talked about that a lot recently, about like being a good listener and asking questions is really the gateway to further understanding. Which is a really simple idea, obviously. But in the moment, I, as a human, can just want to look like I know all things, want to look like I know what's going on. And maybe that was even Croesus, like, oh yeah, I'm strong, I've got a good empire, I'm the happiest man on earth, right? Like all of these things that he thought he held. Again, it was almost like he was obsessed with his own happiness, his own power, and he missed all the intricate details surrounding these prophecies and what his life was leading up to.
Yeah, and I mean, he had taken on so many different lands at the time. He had a huge empire, the Lydian Empire, and so why wouldn't he?
Why wouldn't he continue?
Why wouldn't he feel like he is the greatest man of all time at that point?
Yeah, well, it's super interesting though. Like you mentioned that he called out to the god, and the god brought the rain. But it's interesting because the reason that we got to that point was because he first called out to Salome. Right, that's the first thing that he started to do. He kept saying this name, Salome, Salome. And then Cyrus inquired with the person who was interpreting and say, what's this name he keeps calling out? And then it says Croesus held his peace. And then finally, after the rain came, and he says, okay, this is Salome. This is what I heard. That's what he told me. And it's interesting, he says, if only I could speak to Salome now, or if only I could get counsel from Salome in this moment, I would know really what's next in my life, or if I'm about to die. What do you think he really, like, why do you think he called out to him? That was kind of my interpretation, like, but why do you think he called out to Salome? Why do you think he wanted to see Salome?
I think it was that he was about to die, maybe a noble death, or a death that was honorable at that time, that he was dying amongst his men, fallen, and with his fallen kingdom. But I think it was more about, okay, am I dying a happy death? Like, is this going to reflect on me, and I finally can be said to have been the happiest man alive?
Good point, because Salome said that a man who goes into battle having lived a fruitful life and dies in battle died happy, died fighting for what he believed in, right? Didn't he say that?
I don't remember.
I do remember. Okay, I will say I do remember that. He was saying, like, he explained a couple different people who were happy, who died happy. And one of them was a man who goes into war and dies valiantly for his country. And so maybe that was his he's thinking that, hey, get Salome. Did I win? Did I win the happiness game of life? But I think that it almost has to be something that you come to terms with yourself, right? Because it seems that he was in a happier disposition than when he first saw Salome. And what I mean by that is he turns around and he starts being a benefactor to Cyrus. He starts saying, hey, Cyrus, let me bestow my wisdom upon you. Here's some things that I would do. Here's some things that I have seen through my life and why my kingdom obviously his kingdom fell, but why my kingdom was great. And he kind of turns around and starts to be a service unto Cyrus. And I think that in his arrogancy when first speaking with Salome, I don't know if he would have necessarily done that. This was like a humbling process, right? His son dies, his kingdom falls, he's about to be burned on the pile. And I think like humility seems to really strike him in that moment. What do you think?
Yeah, like you just listed, I think it was a process of seeing that he was honorable in several different ways that were just even recorded here. That maybe he was proud or arrogant when he was showing off all of his fortune and saying, am I happy? Or maybe it was just at the time, why wouldn't he want that credibility of being happy because of all that he's taken on?
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a change. It seemed like it was a progression for sure, but I didn't know him personally, so I don't know exactly where he was at to begin with.
Yeah.
But definitely with his son and the man who murdered his son accidentally, showing grace there.
Yeah.
And then even, his son calls out when Cresus is taken captive, and then he's about to die at the hands of a soldier of some sort, and his deaf and dumb son, as is stated here, cries out, "Don't kill Cresus."
Yeah, he speaks his first words of his life.
Yeah. And so even the fact that he was still being taken care of in the palace or wherever they were, I think that shows grace and mercy, that he didn't just the son that was explained at first as just being useless to Croesus was still somehow connected with him, like he hadn't just been thrown out.
Well, yeah, that was interesting because you're right. At first we heard that he was of uselessness, basically. It's kind of how the history explained it. But then, yeah, you're right. In this scene, it says he had been in the palace, he had been taken care of, he had been actually treated with somewhat of esteem. I don't know if those are the exact words, but it does say that he was taken care of, and then he's there in this final, really important scene to save his life. And so it just shows, like, you never know who or what is going to show mercy or be the thing that provides exit from a catastrophe for you. If he would have rejected his son and sent him away and said, "I'll never speak," he wouldn't have been able to yell out and, in a sense, save his life in that moment.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. One thing that line it says, scarcely indeed can any man. Oh, sorry, that was last week. Whatever is human is insecure. Cyrus says that, and it's interesting because he's speaking to Cresus in that moment, and I really wondered, like, is he thinking of himself? Is he thinking like, okay, yes, I just took over Cresus in this empire, but is he like trying to think forward on, okay, I'm here, but could I be fallen as well? in a few short years, like Croesus. Like, what are your thoughts on that moment? Because the last week we discussed that empires are quickly rise and fall. And do you think Cyrus was kind of like thinking that in the moment?
I think that's interesting about these records and different things that we read from this time period is that there's all this chaos and what it seems like destruction and foolishness, just even like Croesus not taking the time to maybe understand his oracle that was read to him.
Yeah.
And we're reading it and it's hindsight. So it's like, don't you see what's coming when we read the oracle? And then there's these lines thrown in there like that are just, they seem so deep, so wise, so telling of what the depth of that person might be. But then at the same time, I think that sometimes people just say things and we can read them understanding the depth of them and what they actually might mean.
Yeah.
When they might just be saying it without the understanding of what maybe we are understanding out of it. Yeah. So maybe he did say that with the humility of, well, even my kingdom is insecure. And who knows who's going to take it from me. But then at the same time, all these great men, often we're so proud. Yeah. I mean, you can't have pride in yourself and confidence and the arrogance to think that you could take on other kingdoms. Like you couldn't do that without that pride. Confidence and pride. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a great line. I think it can be used very well for us.
Yes.
But I don't know what he meant exactly by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that totally makes sense. You're right. Like what you say in the moment isn't always the profound thing that is read in history's writings. And we see that throughout a lot of history documentation of maybe they said one thing, but actually it was meant another way. Mm-hmm. One thing that really, really stood out to me is when Sardis starts to be plundered by Cyrus' men. Mm-hmm. And Cresus looks out and he said, and this was just, I was like, ooh, dang, that was good. Cresus looks out and he says, what are your men doing? And Cyrus says, they're plundering your city, basically. And he goes, nay, they're plundering your city. And I thought, man, that was quick. But it was so true. It was so simple. It was such a simple observation. But it was Croesus' quick determination that, okay, this is no longer my city. I've been crushed. But then also to turn it and look at Cyrus and say, they're stealing your stuff. And I thought, wow, that was a hot take. And it was interesting. He says, let me give you some wisdom, right? And so then he goes on this whole thing of like, okay, if they get rich, then they're not going to feel they have a need for you. So this is how you need to approach this. You need to go down there. You need to tell them that there's a tribute that needs to be given to Jupiter, I think it was. And they're going to take the money, and that way they won't feel like it's been taken from them. And then the money will be stored, so it'll be kept within your kingdom. And you won't have a lot of quote-unquote semi-rich people popping up because they looted the city. And so he says, do this to protect your empire, so to speak. Now, this intrigued me. I thought, okay, was Croesus like promoting this continuation of like a king, right? So like he's like, hey, you don't want basically what he's saying is you don't want like a democracy, right? He's like, you don't want all these people spreading out the power because now wealth is contained amongst all these people thinking they don't need you, right? Like that's how you'll see mutiny take place. Mm-hmm. So obviously I just talked a lot. What are your thoughts on that whole narrative that took place?
Like you said, it's really cool. It's that Croesus shares that wisdom because he could have just been thinking it and thought, well, I don't like this guy, and
whatever his nation weakens.
Yeah, then so be it. Yeah. I'll just let these people go, and then they'll crush Cyrus, and there'll be another great, somebody else will rise up.
Yeah.
So it is really cool that it's kind of like the whole, brother to brother, like from one king to another. Yeah. Let me help you out here.
Yeah.
Because I can see that you are very powerful, and so I want to help you do this. It was just kind of funny, but it was interesting because apparently the lands that Cyrus was overtaking were very poor. I mean, Croesus said that, like, these people that you've overtaken and now are part of your army, they're all poor people. And so they're just going to loot. And I don't know if that means
His soldiers were poor people?
yeah, I
Okay.
mean, well, so like, he takes over these lands and then they become part of his
Yes, I see what you mean.
army.
Yep.
And then they go and conquer other lands.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if maybe the fear of if people that are poor, because I guess at this time you're poor and so you also are not intelligent, you don't have access to learn, you're just poor and maybe not intelligent.
Yeah.
And so they're going to take all this stuff and like you said, they're just going to feel like they have power.
Yeah.
And then it's just going to be chaos.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's this sense of there are always certain people in time that have a sense of leadership and they know how to bring order to lands. And otherwise it's just chaos and it's just barbaric. And so maybe it was this idea of, okay, this man has overtaken my land, my people that I have ruled over.
Cared for.
In a sense, maybe.
Yeah.
And I don't want them coming in and plundering something that I've worked for. If it's going to have to pass to another king, I want to make sure that it doesn't just fall apart because he doesn't know how to lead.
So he still had respect for the people. Obviously, I mean, they were his people. Like,
Yeah.
You don't hate, I mean, there's obviously some rulers in time that hated their own people.
For sure.
But, I mean, these were his people. And so he, in essence, lays down, again, it's like that journey of humility. Like I see kind of like the hero's journey taking place here in this narrative because he dies the hero. Like he does die happy in essence. I mean, he's not dead yet, according to where we're reading, but he does die, or his kingdom dies, his insertion in the kingdom dies, and he dies a hero in essence because he's saying, hey, like I'm going to save my people from this chaos that would ensue. They're being looted, they're being stolen from. So it's kind of like two angles. He's like, hey, I'm going to Cyrus, I'm going to help you out. But then also he's thinking about like helping out his people, that they don't get looted and pillaged. And then it just his whole city just goes plundered.
Right. I mean, he did show care for his people when a few pages prior, the people come to him because there is some sort of wild beast that is destroying their crops, and he sends his son out to help them.
Yes.
And so, yeah, there is this sense of caring for his people and helping the land flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting what you said earlier about like one person having the wits, ability, education, and wisdom to be able to rule over a people. And it's so interesting, this fine line between like rulership and authority and, what we have here in America as, democracy, and then like trusting a couple of people to make wise decisions. I think we watched Star Wars last night, and, he said they're arguing back and forth about what democracy is. And then Padme and Anakin are talking, and she says, well, that's what we try to do. He's like, well, there needs to be a bunch of people who get together and decide what's best for the people. And she says, well, that's what we do. She says, but sometimes people don't agree. And he says, well, then somebody should make them to agree. And she says, who? He says, somebody wise. She says, sounds a lot like a dictatorship. And he says, if it works, and it's like a lot of times, like we often think that there's this one wise person that can solve the problem, or there's one wise group of people. But it takes such finesse to organize a mass of people for their own betterment, because everybody has a selfish bone, right? I mean, these people who are pillaging the city, they thought, I need something. I need what I want. And so there's always motives. And so to see Cresus here kind of pushing off his motives, what it seemed like, was very, very interesting, because he really was looking out for the betterment of his people.
We'll have to see.
We will. Yeah, we will. I mean, right now it seems
Maybe he
like
does
that.
have motives.
Yeah,
we'll
but I just feel like these are this is the conversation that's taking place throughout the great books. I think most, because I look at the authors that are in the great books, and it's like, I think the organization of nations, the ruling of people, the betterment of society, the organization of society is something that we're already seeing in these first handful of authors. This fight and this struggle with how to live peaceably. Again, why would men only a foolish man would want war over peace? And so I feel like we're already struggling with this question on what is the best way for a people to be organized and to live. Is it a single ruler, or is it the authority spread out amongst many people? And I'm just excited to kind of hear the different wisdom throughout history, read what worked and what didn't throughout history, and then just continue to explore how we ended up to where we are today. And I feel like it's a question that many people are still trying to answer. And that's why I'm excited we're reading this, because we get to see all the different things that were tried.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many people would do well, us included, to know what worked and what didn't throughout many, many generations. Are you seeing that? Like, are you seeing
Oh, yeah.
what I'm saying here?
I'm agreeing.
Okay. And it's hard because, like, in one vein, you feel like you're seeing what's working, but in another vein, you see sometimes it doesn't work. So I'm partially babbling because I'm just kind of going through these thoughts in my head. But I'm grateful to have a front seat on history, and I'm grateful that we're going through this. As difficult as it is to every week pick up and read 5 to 10 pages, it's just I'm learning so much in these short pages. Herodotus, he wrote so well, and the translations that we have, I mean, the story is so easy to follow and captivating. He even talked about the reason that Cresus fell was because of Gygas, right? Because of his great grandfather. He took on the kingdom out of
sin.
Yeah, sin. Yeah, that's literally what it says. You know, he took the kingdom, saw the queen, and then killed the king, and Cresus then paid the punishment for Gygas' sin. So sin has generational consequences, and sometimes we don't even know why we're going through something hard, you know, whether it is a generational thing or just we made a bad decision. You know, for them, they believed that the gods were in control, and so the gods were punishing this generational sin.
Yeah, because we've talked about that before, because I mean, you said that, but then is that really true?
Is that really
because
true?
You can change the narrative of maybe what your fate is, but only if you actually are living a different life. And so that is a question. Was Croesus living like his, I think it was great-great-grandfather, Gygas?
Yeah.
Is that why his kingdom fell? Now, this narrative, this account is saying that it was the gods punishing him, that you can't escape your fate.
Yeah.
But was that actually true? So do we take the consequences for our forefathers' sin because they sinned and we can't do anything about it no matter how we live?
Yeah.
Or is it that we do have consequences because we are living like they were living? And so, of course, we're going to have consequences because they had consequences for the way they were maybe acting badly, and we're doing the same thing because we were trained by them or taught by them or just have the same genetics and are inclined to those things.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to have consequences if you're living like they were living and it was bad. But if you are trying to live a different way, a better way, are you still going to have the consequences for something they did generations ago? I don't believe so. And if you're going through things that are hard, maybe it's just easier to blame them.
Absolutely.
Instead of maybe reflecting on maybe what was my part in this.
Yeah.
I mean, Croesus, okay, was he really being punished? Or is it just because he wanted to take on another kingdom because he didn't like that Cyrus was overtaking people that were related to him? And so it was just easier to go to war and say, well, the oracle says that I'm going to take over, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Instead of saying I'm going to live differently and I'm going to keep to myself and keep peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
I mean, there's a lot of accounts in history where there's an oracle who speaks, either the person listens or doesn't hear correctly, and they are taken, right? And so I think, it's really, I think there's a lot of determining factors based on how you are living. And I think it was an easy place. It is an easy place to blame. Like you said last week, when things are going well, we celebrate ourselves. When things are going poorly, we look to God or the gods, depending on, the belief of that you're reading or thinking, and you start to blame. When everything's great, I'm awesome. I did well. Yay me. When it's bad, you look to external sources to push your blame. And whether that's the case here right now with Cresus or not, it's what the book said. And I think this is a lot of where people get, we see it throughout history of where the blame is pushed on the gods or on the universe. I think that's one that's more common right now. The universe had it out for me. I agree. I definitely agree. I know I painted the picture of, Gaius it was his fault that Croesus fell. But I agree. I think this is why introspection, this is why reading things like this are so important, because then you can start to see, you will find stories where a king was different than his heritage. He did good. He thought well of his people. And it's really a lot of self-reflection that it takes to change your ways. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The Great Conversation.